And we are back for our third episode this week. October turned and postseason baseball came, and we have been super busy this week, whether we're writing about the games, recording about the games, or like yourself, going to the games. We've had a lot of baseball talk this week, lots of stuff to go over, not only recapping the wild card round, but also kind of diving in and looking at the divisional series, which begins when this episode drops later today, with the Orioles and Rangers beginning at 1, ending with Dodgers and Diamondbacks at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. But yeah, it's another episode number 11 of ClubCast. How you feeling, Jake?
Almost a dozen, man. Almost a dozen. I didn't think it lasted this long, to be honest.
Yeah,
Nah, man, it's a lot of fucking fun, man. We're like you said, 3 times this week. We're in full swing, man. Um, I was at the game the other day. I'm locked in now, so it's gonna be fun, man. We got some good games coming up. Definitely, honestly, a lot of fun things to talk about. So we'll get right into it, man.
Yeah. But before we go in to highlighting the division series for both the American League and National League, I kind of just want to get some of your thoughts for the wild card, because for the most part, all of our picks were pretty much right. I think the only one that we got wrong was, I think you picked the Rays, and I think that was the only one that didn't go our way. And I mean, listen, when 19,000 fans are going to your games, I don't think there's much enthusiasm for the players that are playing in those games. So it's understandable why a 99 win Rays team didn't move on. But I'm a little surprised that none of these series went to 3 games, aren't you?
Yeah, I think what we talked about with the Rays, I think was the big thing we got wrong was I thought the pitching was going to shove. I mean, they didn't do anything. Eflin got lit up a little bit. Last night was good, but not good enough. I think that's what really surprised. I think that's why most of the games only went two, or only series went 2 games because we didn't really have that outlier pitcher on the worst team. Usually you have that one guy like I'll say Zach Gallen, but for the other team. You know what I mean? The one guy that can go in and win a game, and then the team just doesn't support him. But that didn't really happen. We kind of just got steamrolled in most of these series. I mean, a couple of them weren't even competitive, really. So it was honestly a surprise. But like you said, we got most of them right. The Rays did surprise me, but 19,000 fans, man. Like, what do you expect?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that competitive in my mind. We tried to highlight why some of these series should probably go 3 games or at least be a lot more competitive than what they were. But just starting off with how the Phillies were last week, the Marlins just seemed outmatched that entire series. Whether it was the starting pitching, bullpen, and definitely the offense, which was the biggest factor, the biggest separator between those two teams, because it seemed as soon as the Phillies scored 1 or 2 runs with the way Nola and Wheeler were pitching, it just seemed like that was impossible to overcome. And then the Rays, that's probably the biggest disappointment because it looked like a team, the Rays were a team that won 99 games. The way they played, it looked like they lost 99 games. It looked like they weren't supposed to be a playoff team. They were awful on the bases. They were awful on defense. They had so many errors in the outfield on misplaying balls that allowed multiple runners to get around all the way to home. Not a good look for Tampa with the fans, especially with the new stadium that we talked about. It looks good. After kind of seeing everything about that, I'm a little concerned about the new stadium staying in St. Petersburg. Um, but then, even the Blue Jays, I feel like that series was competitive, but it just seemed. I want to get your opinion on it, on Jose Barrios getting pulled with 43 pitches when he's cruising. Immediately gets pulled. Carlos Correa comes through with the RBI knock to get the Twins on the board in Game 2, and they never looked back. And I feel like that's probably the most interesting decision. Kind of in terms of a manager, could cost him his job depending on what the Blue Jays do this offseason.
It didn't make much sense to me. Definitely, I didn't. I mean, I don't know the in-depth statistics on like second time around the order and things like that. But you have a guy. You have. I mean, your guy. It's him and Gosman there, and you need to win a game. That's who you rely on. You saw the Phillies do it with Wheeler and Nola. You saw Gallen go out there. I keep bringing him up, but you saw him go out there. So all these guys that they've relied on. And then you have a guy who's giving you a good start. I mean, he wasn't pitching bad at all. And like you said, it was 40-some pitches, and you're taking him out in a wild card series. And that was the second game, too. So that's an elimination game, which is even worse. It's didn't make much sense to me. And like you said, man, especially with a roster like that, underperforming, bad decision making. Honestly, it could be a big problem over there or up there in Canada, man. I just don't see how anybody in that organization can view this season as a success with that roster and that staff.
Yeah, I feel like that it's the two teams in the American League's East, besides the Orioles, that have the most question marks about what they got to do. Because, Tampa, they're at a point right now, they're at a crossroads where they've been there enough where these first round exits aren't going to cut it, even with whatever fan base they have. They've been there a lot, and they now own the longest playoff loss now since the Twins won
Right. Yeah.
their streak. I think the Rays have lost 7 straight games in the playoffs, which is not good. Not good. But you mentioned Zach Gallen, and that is something I looked to immediately regarding the Barrios situation, because Gallen didn't look too good in the first 2 innings, but he said to Torey Lovello, he said to the manager and the team, he said, you know what, I got to give 5 or 6 innings, and he did just that. And the D-backs ended up inching away and winning that game and winning the series. So this is the time of the year where managers' decisions are looked at heavily. I know this as a Dodgers fan because so many people criticize our manager for whatever move that he makes, but every fan base is going to look at that, especially once we get to these matchups that we have in the divisional series, which we have a lot of big matchups. A lot of these teams in the National League especially have World Series aspirations. So that's definitely going to be what fan bases are going to be looking at heavily, what their managers do and how their team performs. But I thought it was still a good wild card week. It sucks that we had the Thursday, Friday off because it feels like I've just been itching to watch something baseball related on TV. And there's just been no baseball. So thankfully we have a good full slate on Saturday with a bunch of these interesting matchups.
Yeah, I literally was driving home from the game listening to WIP and just saying how anxious I was because we didn't have any baseball for 2 days. I don't think anybody really expected that to happen. All the games would be sweeps. But yeah, man, I'm itching. Like you said, honestly, probably at least 5, maybe 6 of these teams are really, really hopeful for a World Series and have high aspirations. It's not, these teams left aren't teams that are just happy to be there. They want to win. So we're gonna get some even better action going down the stretch.
Yeah. Well, we'll move forward to the first matchup of the day. The Texas Rangers, who we already mentioned, took care of business down in Tampa, sweeping the Tampa Bay Rays, pretty much outplaying them in all assets of baseball. They move on to play the AL leading Baltimore Orioles in Baltimore. How excited are you to see playoff baseball back in Baltimore, and what do you expect just of this series?
Dude, it's gonna be fun, man. It's gonna be fun. I watched last night the on Twitter. I can't remember the dude that always tweets out from the Orioles pages, but the 2014 eighth inning of the NL or the ALDS, that place rocks, man. That place rocks. It's gonna rival some of these other stadiums like Philly, like Atlanta, like Minnesota, which is another one that I can't wait to talk about. But yeah, man, Orioles, man, we're all in. We want to see them win. Texas definitely stands a chance. I don't think the Orioles are a team that will blow anybody out of the water. I don't think there's really any teams that are going to, dominate. I don't think. Baltimore, I saw this on Twitter a little bit earlier. Are they going to be a regular season team or are they going to be a postseason team? There's a lot of question marks there with the roster because they're so young and a lot of inexperience. But they're really skillful, man. Like Gunnar Henderson has really broken out this year. Obviously, Adley Rutschman, you're getting some good outings out of guys like Grayson Rodriguez, Kyle Gibson, even Kyle Bradish has given them some good innings recently. My opinion, I think Texas can steal a game. with their starting pitching because they have those two top end starters with Montgomery and Evaldi. Obviously, you have your hitters, but pitching wins championships. I'll keep saying it, and I don't think that their lineup can outslug Baltimore to the point to where they would be winning games. They would need to make a valiant effort. It would need to be above and beyond the Orioles lineup, and I just don't think they're able to do that, man. I think that they win a game with Montgomery, but I don't think they win any in Baltimore, man.
Yeah. I mean, I look at this series and like you mentioned, like we don't know what this Orioles team is going to be. They're filled with so many young, inexperienced players. Only a couple guys come to mind that I can think of that were in a playoff atmosphere, and the only one that I can definitely think of is Adam Frazier at second base when he was with
Right.
the Mariners and the Padres in the past. So, um, Kyle Gibson last year, I believe his role is similar to what it is last year after he had a bad September where they kind of axed him to that hybrid bullpen starting role. But yeah, we don't know what this team's going to do. Are they going to be regular season warriors where they win perennial 100-win seasons, but they just can't get it done in October? Or are they going to be a scrappy team come October that still has their eyes on the prize? Because, I mean, they blew away expectations this year. So even if they don't even make it to the World Series or win the World Series, I mean, there's still a lot of positives that this team can take, whether it's from management to the players, to the front office, everything. They would take even. I feel like it would be disappointing if they lost this series, but they would still take everything. This is a really great step forward in the process that the O's have been on for the past 10 years of basically rebuilding. I still think they have a really good shot, though. I really like these young players because while on one hand you don't know exactly what you're going to get out of them come playoff time because it is a different atmosphere. There's a different feeling in the stomach. There's a different mental pressure that we don't know with these players how they're going to react. But I still give them a fighting chance because I feel like on the other hand, and we'll go over it with some other teams that are on this list. While there is that inexperience, there's still that hunger to win and to perform. And I think the Orioles have a lot of good young talent that are definitely, in terms of service time, they're well beyond their capabilities. They're gonna hit, they're gonna pitch. It just depends on can they out hit the Texas Rangers. And I feel like if you put these lineups side by side, I would still lean Rangers.
Right.
And the biggest question mark for the Orioles is their starting rotation because when you look at it on paper, it doesn't blow you away. But some of these guys, like Kramer, they just got John Means back, who's probably going to be that game 3 starter, probably going like four innings max, and then they go to their bullpen, which their bullpen behind the Rays was one of the best bullpens in the American League, and that's even with losing their all-star closer Felix Bautista, which he would definitely be someone to count on in that bullpen, but they've still held it together on their own. They kind of handle pitching similar to the Dodgers. It's not a starting rotation. It's a pitching staff of from 1 to 14, 13, however many they carry. That's their pitching staff. Like, they're going to use everybody. Everybody's going to get to pitch. And there's positives and negatives to that. I definitely still think the Rangers, it's going to be hard to get a game in Baltimore just because you mentioned the fans. And I feel like this year and last year, we've seen fans. They have an impact in these games. You were there in Philadelphia. They're on that roll again like they were last year. I mean, on the Dodgers podcast that I usually go on, they had Ned Colletti on, and he was the GM during the 08 and 09 Dodgers, and he said, that's a hard place to go. Like, he's like, that's a hard place to go. I feel like a lot of these East Coast teams in this area, it's a hard place to go to. And Baltimore, I mean, you mentioned that video. It's definitely going to be a challenge for the Rangers. But after a wild card win against the Rays, who had 99 wins, a lot of people weren't picking the Rangers to even move on. It's definitely a confidence booster. So I'm interested to see what this lineup does. But the Rangers are really going to have to ride on the same 2 pitchers at least this round. Potentially, if they move on, they would have Max Scherzer, who's looking to come back, whether you want to believe it or not. but I don't see him coming back this series. But after Evaldi and Montgomery, I'm really not seeing many options in that Rangers pitching rotation.
Yeah, man, that's the biggest question mark. I think, like you said, I would still probably take the Rangers lineup over the Orioles lineup. But the lineup's not good enough to make up for the lack of pitching, in my opinion. I think you talk about it. The fans. I think the fans coming out in Game 1 so electric will make the kids settle down a little bit. I think that'll help them a lot that they start at home, because like you said, inexperience, you go into rival territory for your first playoff game. You have no idea what's going on, man, and you could easily slip and lose a game. And now you're behind all these things. Come out Game 1, you have, I don't know how many Baltimore has, but 40,000 plus people screaming for you. I think it makes you settle down a little bit.
Yeah. That being said, from both of us, I'm interested to see who you think's gonna win this division series.
Yeah, I think Baltimore takes the first two. I think that Texas can steal one back home, but I think it goes in 4, Baltimore 3-1.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth. I definitely could see a situation where the Rangers push this Orioles team to the limit.
Yeah.
But even if it does go 4 or 5 games, I'm still thinking the Orioles are going to end up out on top. They've continued to show all year that they are one of the better teams, not only in the American League, but in baseball. The combination of their young stars, I think most of them will translate to October. And I think their pitching staff, while it is unorthodox, after games 1 and 2, where they're kind of like after you get, I believe, Kramer's starting game 1, and then it's Grayson Rodriguez, and then most likely John Means, which that's a pretty good first 3, especially in the American League, which seems to be weak on pitching. I'm going to ride it. I'm going to ride Baltimore this season. I definitely think they move on to the ALCS. It'll be good to see Baltimore in there because I don't think they've been to the ALCS in a long time. It's been a while. I think it may. Yeah, I can't even remember in recent memory because every year I remember them in the playoffs, it's been in the division series that they've lost, whether it was to the Yankees in 2012. The Royals beat them in the championship series. There you go.
I was about to say
So
that year.
they got swept. So you might as well forget about it.
Yeah, it doesn't really count.
But yeah, I like the Orioles in this one.
Mhm.
I could see the Rangers possibly, depending on if the Orioles pitching plans just falters and maybe the lineup is too much. It'd be interesting to see how the young guys kind of respond to that.
Right.
But I'm going to take the Orioles in this one over the Rangers. I just think the Rangers demons are going to catch up to them, whether it's the lack of pitching in the rotation and then having to use their bullpen, which they didn't have to use much. Jordan Montgomery, I'm surprised they didn't make him pitch a complete game that day. He gave them 7 strong innings. You're not going to get that potentially against this lineup here in Baltimore. So their bullpen, if they're going to move on, their bullpen's going to have to pitch a lot better than what they did in the regular season. But I don't know. I go off what you show me lately, and what I've seen lately is what I've seen all season. So I'll take Orioles in 4 games.
Yeah, I think the biggest X factor there is that Game 2, like you said, with Grayson Rodriguez. He's been really good down the stretch. He turned his season around after being, probably the worst pitcher in baseball when he first was in the league. But if he can come in and shove in that Game 2 and get them that big, swing game, it honestly could be over in 3, 4 at the most, probably at that point.
Yeah. Moving on to another Cinderella story, the Minnesota Twins, who I am been really high on. They not only win their division this year, they've had so much stuff talked about them, bad things. Why are they in the playoffs? Why are they hosting a playoff game? Well, they conquered all demons. Not only did they get their first postseason win in 18 years, they got their first postseason win in a series. They're moving on to the ALDS. Their first postseason series win in 20 years when they beat the Oakland A's in that Moneyball year.
Oh, right.
That's the last time they won a playoff series. So The Twins, they beat the Blue Jays. A lot of questionable calls on the Blue Jays side, but after game one, I picked him to have a big series. Royce Lewis, he looks healthy. He looks ready to mash. They travel to Houston to take on the defending World Series champs. I had to get that in there. But I think the biggest story, and I want to see what you think about it, is as soon as the Twins won, I said Carlos Correa will be going to face his former team. So what do you highlight from this series, and what do you think about Correa going back to Houston to take on the team that he's won 2 World Series with?
Like you said, you've been high all year. I think I finally have to buy in on it, man. Watching that series the other day, it was the early games, and that stadium was electric, man. It was awesome to watch. You called it. Your boy Royce Lewis had big games. Some questionable calls from the Blue Jays side, like you said, but don't think it turns the games around. I think the series still ends up the same way. The Carlos Correa storyline, I'm here for it. I think that's probably the second biggest storyline behind Phillies and Braves is fucking Carlos Correa going back there. I mean, what do you do? Like, I would cheer him. He won you a couple.
You can't cheer him. It's the playoffs.
I know, but I know that, but like, that's your boy. You know what I mean? So it's gonna suck. It's not gonna suck. It's gonna be weird for Houston fans to see that because it's gonna be bittersweet. Just like when Utley came back and hit his grand slam off us and all the fucking shit on us. But yeah, man, him back in Houston. The Astros obviously aren't the same team as they've been over the last half decade, almost decade at this point. But I still think it's going to be really competitive. I think the Twins kind of found their swagger with their atmosphere and just kind of everything clicking. I think, like you said, what have you done for me lately? I think they're clicking at the right time. Still don't know how the time off will affect these teams. So last year with the teams with the buys didn't perform too well. So it's going to be different. I think obviously Houston's pitching is going to be a big part of this, how deep it is and everything like that. But man, the Twins have that vibe right now. They have some good top end pitching too. So it's going to be an exciting series.
Yeah. I mean, what did I say in the wild card episode that we did? If there was any chance that the Twins moved on, it was going to be because of timely hitting and elite pitching. And they got both of those because they didn't out-hit the Blue Jays by much because I think the Blue Jays in the hit column had more total hits, but the Twins took advantage and got hits when it mattered. Right. Whether it was clutch hitting by Carlos Correa or taking advantage of piss missile fastballs down the middle, Royce Lewis depositing it into the left field bleachers, this team, they fired on all cylinders. Bob Nightingale was I believe, at one of the games, and he called it Bedlam in Minneapolis, which a lot of Phillies fans criticize him for. But watching a 1:00 game in Minnesota, I mean, everyone was talking shit about oh, well, the scheduling sucks. That's why the Rays didn't sell out. No, if you're a good team and you have passionate fans, you're going to sell out that stadium. That stadium's not small. It holds around 40,000 fans, and they were packed there. They were ready for some playoff baseball, and they showed out. It was loud even on the TV for 1:00. But you said your biggest question mark, whether how far the Twins would go, would be how Sonny Gray was, and yeah. Sonny Gray looked probably the most locked in out of anybody, and probably the play that changed that entire series was the pickoff play with Carlos Correa, because I feel like people forget however his struggles were on offense this year for Correa, he's still been an amazing defender. He's a Platinum Glove Award winner, Gold Glover at shortstop, which is weird because he for his body type, he doesn't fit the shortstop profile. He's very tall. A lot of the shortstops, they're skinny, smaller because they got to be quicker, But yeah, Correa, he showed up big for this Twins team. And then Sonny Gray, putting the dagger in the Blue Jays' hearts, getting out of some jams, going 5 strong innings. Elite pitching, like you said, it's going to win in October, probably 9 times out of 10. There's not many teams that could outslug you. And when you look on paper, the Blue Jays should have outslugged them. The Blue Jays have some of the best offensive players on their team, whether it's Bo Bichette, who's leading the league in hits, or Vlad Guerrero Jr., who can hit around 30 to 40 home runs every year, or even George Springer manning it down in center, who can also hit around 25, 30 home runs a year. The Twins just showed up when it mattered, and they're a team that it seems like the way they're put together and the way they're firing on all cylinders right now, they may just be getting hot at the right time. And that's really all it takes for a team, even if they only have 80 handful wins. We've seen it countless times, whether it was the Braves in 21, the Phillies last year. Some teams just get hot and click at the same time. And there may be a little bit of magic going on in Minneapolis this year.
Mm-hmm.
Going to the Astros, you are right. This is a different year for the Astros. We're talking about a team that if they lost one of those games in Arizona, they would have been either the 5th or 6th seed playing in that wild card series.
Mm-hmm.
They sneak out somehow with the division crown, get that playoff bye, much needed playoff bye, because not only did their starters need rest, like Justin Verlander, some of these guys that have been struggling, like Hunter Brown, Christian Vasquez, these guys, the Astros just look beatable now, at least this season. And, they may like that chip on their shoulder, like, oh, you think you can beat us? Like, all right, well, we're going to show out when we always show out in October. In terms of who I think is going to win this series, I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to hear like what you think about this series before I kind of give my picks, but I'm leaning a certain way.
I know it's gonna be a surprise. I think for you, I think it's gonna go the opposite way. But honestly, man, I think the biggest thing is that Minnesota has to win one of these first 2 games. If they come out and I keep saying if they come out and they lose the first 2 games, they're not gonna win. But you got to stand the Astros straight up, man. You got to stand them up. Say, hey, you're not the same team. We're not scared of you anymore. Last year, looking at the playoffs, there wasn't many teams that I was afraid of. But when I got to the Astros, I said, hey, this team's better than us. I don't see that anymore. I think that Carlos Correa, obviously, it's just impossible for him not to be an X factor in this series. He lived for the moment. We talked about it a ton last time. He's a villain. He's going back home into one of the most hated teams in sports history. So he's gonna have some shit to say. But I wrote this. It ran real close, man. Yeah, it ran real close. But I put Twins 3-2.
I'm surprised
Yeah.
because I'm kind of leaning the Twins in this one. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if I just like the storyline of the Astros losing. I don't know if I like the vibes in Minnesota. I just think the way the Twins are playing right now is perfect for October. And I mean, it sounds cheesy to say, yeah, my X factor is Carlos Correa. I think there's going to be some type of feeling of him hitting in Minute Maid Park again that maybe just revitalizes his hitting. Like maybe he gets miraculously healthy and goes on a run in this series. Because if there's anyone that can, whether it's cheers or boos, if there's anyone that can play to the boos in an away ballpark, it's definitely Carlos Correa. But I go back to what we mentioned before, and the Astros struggled at home this year for whatever reason. And, with the off days, the Twins got an advantage, dude. They go Joe Ryan, most likely game 3, and then they're going right back to Pablo Lopez and Sonny Gray. And if you can sneak out of there with at least one, whether Joe Ryan wins or Pablo Lopez wins, and then you go back to Minnesota up in the series, I think it's hard to, and especially in a 5-game series, I think it's hard to come back from that, even for this Astros teams. If I'm going to give credit to anybody that can come back down in a series in a away ballpark, it would be Houston, because, I mean, we said it time and time again, until I see them not win, then I should take them, or I should take the credit from what they've done in the past, because the core of this team's been nearly the same. But you know what? I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go Twins, and I think the Twins win in 5 games. I think somehow this series gets pushed back to Houston, but I feel like because Houston's played pretty bad at home, I think the Twins sneak out of there with a series win. I could definitely see it ending in 4 games, depending on how the 2 games in Minnesota go and what the matchups are. But there's just something about this Houston pitching staff this year that I don't trust, which is funny because at the beginning of the year, that was one of the things where I said they probably have the best pitching staff in baseball, or at least the deepest pitching staff in baseball. And it ended up not being that way at all. They've gotten hurt with injuries, inconsistencies. I mean, I mentioned Hunter Brown earlier. He was some guy that was supposed to replace Justin Verlander. He couldn't do that. He had an ERA over 5. They ended up trading back for Justin Verlander, and even he's been pretty shaky this year. So it'll be interesting, but I really think the Twins kind of go on a run this year. So I'm picking Twins versus Orioles in the ALCS. It would be an awesome matchup for the fans that have been of these teams that have had to endure those bad times. But I think it'll also be refreshing for baseball in general to get some new fan bases, some new blood on the line for the World Series.
Yeah, man, that would be dope. Just thinking about that, just kind of welcoming in the new like stars to the show, basically. But I like what you said, man. I don't care about regular season records. I don't care about what you did in April, May, June, July. I care about what you're doing right now. The Twins are clicking right now. Obviously, the Astros are the Astros, but it's hard for me to believe that this can run out so quick. But it could. They could go into Houston and drop both, and then what do you really say at that point? You're down 2-0 going home. Yeah, they might be able to squeeze one away with that atmosphere, but it doesn't look good for them at that point. So I
Yeah.
think what they need to do is come out and stand them up and show them that they belong there. And if they don't, they're in trouble.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to bet against a team that's been to 6 or 7 straight American League Championship Series, but at some point, while their run may not be over, there could be some interruption in there. This just doesn't seem like the stars are aligning for Houston this year, and they've had a lot of issues. But I could see the Twins upsetting in this series. I think it'd be really interesting, but that's what I'm going to go with. So
We talk about the Phils now.
yeah, I mean, arguably, moving on, we got the Philadelphia Phillies destroying, toying, playing, not even competitively. They just destroyed the Marlins.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Marlins played them tough. I gave my explanations for why I thought this series would be a little bit more competitive. Because at face value, it just seemed like the Marlins were your version of the Padres, where they just play for spite.
Right.
They play to just upset. They were the team that you would face in September in previous years and just wouldn't get past them, and you would end up missing the playoffs by a couple games because of those games.
Yep.
And now they finally had a chance to not only play you in the playoffs, but they had a chance to play you in a short series and potentially eliminate them. And it didn't happen. The Marlins looked outmatched in every facet, and you got that pick straight on, Phillies in 2. Now we got probably arguably the most interesting matchup that we're probably going to see this postseason. Probably the most highly anticipated matchup is the Phillies and Braves. We saw it last year. We saw the Phillies magic. They upset the Braves, who not only won the division last year, but also won over 100 games. Are we about to see repeating history from last year? Do the Phillies go into Atlanta and end up on top?
This is going to be fun. I'm going to start with Atlanta because I want everybody to know that I'm not that much of a piece of shit. Atlanta is such a good baseball team, man. That team is so good. They one of the best hitting teams ever. I mean, 800 slugging or 500 slugging percentage this year as a team. Matt Olson does Matt Olson things. Ronald Acuna, most likely the MVP winner. Then you go into that starting rotation, man. You have Spencer Strider, who, while he doesn't have a lot, he has a higher ERA. He's one of my guys that I always talk about. When you get to the playoffs, you want your guys with stuff, and he's got stuff, man. He's got that electric fastball and a good slider and sweeper and stuff like that. Max Fried, a little banged up with that blister still on his finger, but still Max Fried is Max Fried. Does throw a primary curveball, so it won't be that good in the playoffs. But it's still a really good Braves team, man. It's a team that I'm definitely, I wouldn't say worried because I don't get worried, but I'm definitely not taking lightly, I think. But when you go to the Phillies, man, how could you not be happy? How could you not be excited? How could you not be anxious after just watching that series? Yeah, I don't think the Marlins were a playoff team, so it doesn't, like you said, we demolished them. I'm not, taking that for granted, but I think the outing from Nola was huge. Wheeler didn't look tired or fatigued from the long postseason last year, which is really good. I think we only pitched like 4 1/3 out of the pen in the 2 games, which is another big thing. Yeah, man, it's it's the perfect matchup. We said it last week. These teams match up the best against each other. They're rivals. They're both electric. Phillies fans are calling their mascot a fucking terrorist on Twitter today. It's just this whole thing going on, man. You can't be more excited than you can for this series right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where after watching last year's playoff matchup, the Braves, I think this is the one team they didn't want to run into again. And I've seen it all over Twitter. And you can love the Braves. I'll talk shit about the Braves now because I've seen all up and down Twitter, anywhere on social media, that they're complaining about this playoff format because they think it's unfair that they have to play the fourth seeded Phillies. I think it's just a matter of fact that it seems like they know that humiliation is still in the back of their heads. It's still in the back of my head as a Dodger fan from what I watched last year, and I'll get to that when we talk about it on our next series. But the Braves should be worried after what I watched the Phillies do against Miami. It kind of looked like the same formula how they got to the World Series last year. They rode their big two. Wheeler looked as probably good as I've ever seen Wheeler. You mentioned to me off air, if you want to see good pitching, just watch Wheeler's playoff highlights for last
I can
year.
tell you, man.
And he just looked lights out. I mean, I don't think there was a better pitcher on the planet that day that he was pitching. He had the Marlins hitters just off balance. They didn't know what was coming. And that was even with some guys in there that had pop.
Right.
And even the batting champ himself, while he was banged up and he probably wasn't 100%, he still looked fooled on almost all of Wheeler's stuff. It's going to be a big test. Maybe not game one, because I won't be totally sold if, say, Ranger Suarez goes into Atlanta and gets teed off on. Because let's just face it, the Atlanta Braves have one of the best offenses, not just this year, but statistically, they have one of the best offenses ever. They have multiple guys that have had 20, 25 home run seasons. They have a guy leading off their game who we already mentioned is more than likely going to win the MVP, who has stolen 70 bases, hitting over 40 home runs, driven in over 100, basically a five-tool player. While he is shaky on defense, he's still going to be a difference maker. The biggest fear I would have if I was Atlanta is if Wheeler and Nola still look 100% how they did last week or this past week against the Marlins. I don't see a situation where the Braves go into Philadelphia tied 1-1 and win one or both of those games to get out of there. I think if you're a Braves fan, your best case scenario is that if you split at home, I mean, I don't know if you're going to make it past 4 games. I really don't. And I think these first 2 games, and you're going to see it from the intensity from not only the Braves fans, but the Braves players, these first 2 games starting on Saturday. And then I believe both NL teams play on Monday.
Yep.
Those are must-win games. I get it's cheesy. It's the playoffs. Obviously, every fucking game is a must-win game. But no, these 2 games at home for Atlanta are must-win because if they don't win both, I think they will lose this series. I just don't see it. Maybe somehow they can force a game 5, but the only way I can envision a game 5 force is Strider going back to Philadelphia and pitching in front of that crowd. while it may be a little different because he is healthy this year, I guess, whatever you want to take of that, I don't see him forcing a game 5 if he has to pitch in Philadelphia in a must-win game. He has really good statistics against the Phillies in his regular season career, but I know for him that playoff game last year in Philadelphia is definitely in the back of his mind. So I don't think he already even mentioned he doesn't even want to play in front of fans. So imagine going to Philadelphia in front of all those fans, even if he was fucking joking.
Exactly.
Everybody's gonna fuck with him that entire start, and the memes will pour if he loses in Philadelphia. And I think the Braves' plan is not to pitch him in Philadelphia at all.
Right.
He'll go game 1, he'll go game 5 if there's a game 5.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I think this series is going 5, and I think this is where me and you will probably disagree.
If you don't pick the Phillies, we're going to disagree. So
I think it's hard to argue just from what I've seen to not take the Braves offense. And it really just depends on how the Phillies pitching is. If they're lights out, I think the Phillies win. If Nolan Wheeler are as good as they were, like I mentioned, I think the Phillies win this series in 4 games. If the Braves end up taking both games in Atlanta, I think Atlanta wins the series. So I'll go like a split, but I'm probably going to push. I'm just going to take the NL favor, and I'll probably just push Braves in this. But I definitely see, like, I kind of see like a 65% scenario where the Phillies win this series. Mm-hmm. But I'm still going to just take the Braves just because I don't know. Maybe they don't want what happened last year to happen again. So I think they're going to be definitely playing with a lot more intensity. I feel like the Phillies definitely caught them off guard last year. Mm-hmm. But the Phillies are a team that I think could knock out the Braves.
I think you hit it right on the head, man. What you said, like with the pitching matchups, how we need to hit, how they need to play to give themselves a chance. Because really, I mean, like you said, it's the same blueprint as last year. You got Ranger, you have Wheeler, you have Nola at home. That's where you need to win your games. The biggest question mark is obviously game 1, Strider versus Ranger. This is the only question mark I think I have. If Ranger goes out there, you have a guy, Ranger, who's one of the most cold-blooded baseball players in the league. Lives up to the moment. Phillies have been historically good in game 1s, won every game 1 last year, won every game 1 in 2008 when they won the World Series. I think being a homer, if Ranger wins this game, I think we sweep them. Because you're not beating Zach Wheeler in the playoffs. I'm sorry, you're not. Max Fried is not beating Zach Wheeler. Like you said, he was one of the most discussed. That was one of the.
I'll pause you there. I don't even know. They haven't even said anything about Max Fried pitching.
Yeah. Right.
I think Fangraphs didn't even have him listed, and I feel like he has to pitch game 2. Yeah. Like he has to be on the. If he's not on the roster, it's over.
Could you imagine though if they brought him out and it's basically Strider from last year and we just light him the fuck up because he's half injured? That would be even more of a mistake. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't care either way. Zach Wheeler is winning his game, and then you come back home with, like you said, either with 1 win or 2 wins. I don't think you win. You're definitely not winning the Nola start for the first game back. That second game is a little shaky. You'll probably have Chris Sanchez. I don't know if Ranger would Ranger would be set up to pitch again. So it would be Ranger, but again, Ranger's not as cold and as good as Ranger is. He's not a guy that's going to go out there and I'm confident he's going to give me 7 innings and win me a baseball game. I think he'll give me a quality start. But that lineup's really good, man. So I think honestly, I want to talk about this. I'm talking a lot about this, but the X factor, in my opinion, is Orion Kerkering, man. Last year we had Seranthony Dominguez, who came out of the bullpen and struck out 10 out of 15 guys to his first 15 hitters. Orion Kerkering has 3 Major League Baseball games and 1 postseason game. Never been seen, has one of the best sliders in the league, has a 99-mile-per-hour fastball. I think it's just a factor of we need a guy who can come in these situations like Seranthony did last year against Goldschmidt and Arenado and struck them both out twice. I think that's what the moments are going to be bigger than the games. I think you're going to have key decisions that can really turn the series. So honestly, Brian Snicker and Rob Thompson have really have their match made up to. It could go either way, man. I don't
Yeah.
even know what to say at this point.
I'm I'm honestly, because of the way the NLDS works out for off days, like I'm kind of curious to see how both teams go about their pitching matchups if it does go 5 games, because it seems like the Phillies could just use 2 or 3 pitchers and
Right.
the Braves could do the same. Because while the Phillies, we've mentioned before, besides the Twins, probably have the only team in the playoffs right now that have a full rotation of arms, like 1 through 6 for the Phillies, if you want to count Lorenzen. Um, the Braves, they did have that, but now they don't because Charlie Morton's out for this series. You don't know if he's going to pitch in the NLCS, but when you're looking at the NLDS at hand, he's not available.
Mm-hmm.
Max Fried has blister issues. Strider, he's been the best of the bunch, but he's kind of been struggling as of late. He has an ERA near 4. And then Bryce Elder has been pretty bad in the second half. The Dodgers, they teed off on him, and I don't think the Braves are going to be too confident with Elder going into a start in Philadelphia with the hopes of either, if the series is tied 1-1, getting them over the hump and giving them up 2-1. I mean, I don't know how the off days are going to set up. You may be seeing some guys on short rest
Right.
for the Braves. Like, does Strider go on short rest, pitch in Philly, and an elimination going, like, it would be like 3 or 4 days rest?
Right.
I mean, that's the type of stuff that you need to do in the postseason. But in terms of like Braves and where they're at, they can't lose this series, because if they lose this series, you're throwing some major curveballs into their brand as like a potential dynasty, like a team that should be in the World Series every year that just can't get in the World Series every year. It'll be pretty shocking. It'd be pretty demoralizing if they lost to the Phillies again. It would 100% be demoralizing if they got swept like you think that is going to happen. I could see it going either way. Like I said, I'm going to go like 50-50 on this.
Yeah.
Either Phillies win in 4 games or Braves win in 5. I think if it goes 5, the Braves going back to Atlanta, I'll give them the edge. But if the Braves are anywhere with a split going to Philadelphia in a short game series where losing 2 games on the road kills you, yeah, I would say that would be the nail in the coffin for the Braves.
Yeah, I never I never doubt the team, but if they do go back to not to use to Atlanta for Game 5, I would not feel confident. I don't think. I think that would be worst case scenario. They need to finish this in 4 if they're going to win. I think if it goes 5 games, we probably lose.
All right. Well, now we go on to the last series of the night. Out west, we got another divisional showdown between the Arizona Diamondbacks, who upset the Milwaukee Brewers, who me and you both had no confidence in going into throughout the regular season and the postseason. So we'll just put that out there. They showed out against the Brewers. They pitched better. Their bullpen was better. And for what it's worth, they hit better. The Brewers, they've not been known for being an offensive-minded team. It definitely showed in this series and over the week. Because I feel like the Brewers were the better team on paper, and the D-backs got out of there with the series win, series sweep, beating 2 of the better starters in the National League, Corbin Burns and Freddie Peralta, who is super underrated. But yeah, they take care of business, and they head to Los Angeles in another NLDS showdown, their first time meeting since 2017, where at that time the Dodgers swept them. But these 2 teams look 100% different compared to that year. I'm interested to see, out of all we just talked about in the Phillies and Braves, the Dodgers are kind of in that same boat where this series is defining of them, because last year we already mentioned they failed. They similar to the Braves, they lost to their division rival who they dominated almost all regular season. And it's definitely stuck with them to this year, and not only to the fans like myself, or it's also been in the media where I haven't seen anybody pick the Dodgers to even represent the NL in the World Series, which I feel like is the first time that's happened in a long time. I feel like every year that
Yeah.
they've been on this run. Everybody has been plastering on my Instagram feed or whatever. Jeff Pesson picks them to win the World Series, and I'm like, all right, we're not winning now. But yeah, I'm interested to see what you think of this series, and do the Diamondbacks have a chance to not only upset Milwaukee but upset the Dodgers?
It's crazy to think about, man. What, 6 months ago, we were sitting in those seats in Dodger Stadium, never thinking that this would be the matchup for the NLDS. I'll talk about the Diamondbacks a little bit, man. They're a fun team. I know you like them. Obviously, they're a rival, so you can't really like them, but they're just fun to watch. Corbin Carroll's a dog. Fucking Jesus Christ reincarnated Evan Longoria is back and better than ever, man. I love to see that because he's always been one of my favorite guys. But that play he made the other day, just incredible. Yeah, man. I think this is another thing, kind of like the Atlanta and the Philly series, but only for the Diamondbacks. I think if the Diamondbacks need to find a way to win, they have to do it in the moments. I think they need to play good situational baseball, get runs when they can, be aggressive when they can. They have a lot of speed, a lot of contact. Obviously, this LA team's much better. There's a couple question marks with the rotation just because they have a lot of rookies in there. I'm sure you'll talk about that. But I think this Dodger team is definitely better than them. And while the Diamondbacks are fun and they're hot, I don't think they're hot enough. You know what I mean? When we talked about the Twins, how hot they were, that they could maybe compete with the Astros and things like that. I just don't think that the Diamondbacks have that much mojo this year. It's kind of like the Orioles, how they're building up and start this dynasty, but they're not there yet, in my opinion. I think for the best chance in the series, obviously they're gonna have to rely on their pitching with Gallen and Merrill Kelly, but another thing, just like Phillies and Braves, they've seen them a lot. I mean, they see them, 20 times a year. It's really familiar teams. So usually skill comes out of that point. So obviously I'm leaning LA, but if Arizona can manage the game well and play some good situational baseball, I think they can, stand up with them.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like storylines and how the Braves and Dodgers kind of are in familiar territory this time around compared to last year. Braves had the same matchup they had last year, so that's pretty much deja vu. Like that's what they're feeling again. The Dodgers, I don't really think are seeing that 100% because
Right.
the Diamondbacks, while they did make the playoffs over the Padres this year, you can't argue that the Padres, they have a lot of star talent. And last year was just a moment of them just showing up at the right time,
Right.
playing harder than the Dodgers. All their stars, whether it was Machado, Soto, Tatis. Tatis wasn't on that team last year, but Hassan Kim, who had the Josh Bell, like everybody played as a collective unit to dethrone that 111 win team, which it definitely still is in the back of these guys' mind.
Yeah.
Dave Roberts has mentioned it. Mookie Betts has mentioned it. Freddie's mentioned it. Even players that weren't on the team last year, like Bobby Miller, he's mentioned it. He's even mentioned himself. He said in an interview that he had, the fact that people didn't even pick the Dodgers to win the division. He wasn't even on the roster yet. He said it pissed him off. He was like, everyone could think that way, but we knew in this clubhouse what we were going to do. I predicted to a bunch of people when we were in LA. I said if there's one team that's making the playoffs in this division, I said it was the Diamondbacks. I had the Diamondbacks over the Padres, Giants, obviously the Rockies, but I just thought with the way the rules were changing, I felt like it favored the Diamondbacks. And it definitely looked that way in the beginning of the season because they were on a roll. They were in first place for a majority of the first half. Dodgers caught up to them right at the All-Star break and never looked back.
Mm-hmm.
They both these teams have different goals. Last series, both that we talked about, the Phillies and the Braves, both teams had the same goals. Both teams are World Series aspiration teams. The Diamondbacks, while they can say, yes, we want to win a World Series, like you said, they're just not there yet. I mean, if they were in the American League last year, they would have been the Orioles and missing the playoffs. They had the same amount of wins. The Diamondbacks had 84 this year. I think the Orioles had 84, 85 last year and missed because the American League race was so close. looking at paper, these teams are obviously separated, by talent. While the Diamondbacks have a lot of good up-and-coming players like Corbin Carroll, they don't have much outside of Carroll, Christian Walker. I'm not really too afraid of them on offense. It's just the way they play offense that scares me in the playoffs, which, all right, get a bloop. He steals second, he steals third. Christian Walker gets a double.
Right.
That the game's tied. Someone drives him in with the bunt, and then they get a sac fly. Now they have the lead. Those are the types of plays in October that can make or break a team, and that's exactly how the D-backs play. So they're a small ball type of team, and that could be annoying in the playoffs for a team that doesn't really practice against small ball. But the Dodgers, like I said, I'm taking this game by game, but at the end of the day, I can't not see, even if I wasn't a Dodgers fan, if I had to look at the matchup, it should be clearly LA is the favorite here. And the reason I say it even more is you brought up the D-backs need their pitching. I don't know if you've ever seen Merrill Kelly's and Zach Allen's stats against Los Angeles. They're pretty fucking bad. Merrill Kelly started in, I think, 16 games against the Dodgers in his career and is 0-11 with an ERA over 4, a whip over 2. It's crazy. And Zach Gallen is in the same territory. He's 1-5 in 9 starts against the Dodgers in his career. It just seems like these guys could pitch well against any other team, and the Dodgers just may be their kryptonite. And it's hard to kind of change that in the playoffs. It rarely happens. But I wrote in my article today on Dodgers Beat, I said the only way this Dodgers team either moves on in this series or even in the postseason is what I mentioned before on this show. Kershaw goes as far as Kershaw goes is as far as the Dodgers go. And this is a year where I feel like a lot of people are counting out Kershaw. They kind of are looking at the health, the innings, and all that. At the end of the day, he's still probably one of the best pitchers in the playoffs. And you got to take what you've seen because he's been a really good pitcher in the second half. While he hasn't gone past the 5th inning, he's definitely not playing against this lineup the 3rd time through. None of the pitchers are except for Bobby Miller. Right. And that's my biggest fear is just how they manage this pitching. Because I think, and I'll argue this for a bunch of different ways, I think from pitching from 1 through 14 or however many pitchers are on the team, it's probably better than every team in this probably playoff that's left in the playoffs. Because I won't take their rotation over anybody. Right. I'll take every pitcher that they have because their bullpen, complete 180 compared to what they were doing in the beginning of the season where they were fucking awful. They had an ERA over 7, right, getting close to June. And from June on, they've actually had the 2nd best ERA in baseball behind the Brewers. And it's definitely going to be a big part of the Dodgers. I'm going to go just based off of what I've seen, the matchups. The days off, Merrill Kelly and Zach Allen will be pitching games 2 and game 3. Mm-hmm. Game 1's looking like it's going to be the guy.
Brandon.
Whatever his name is.
He goes by his first name.
So I'm going to go LA in 4. I think this is a team that they should be able to take care of business, but I can't. With the Phillies and Braves, there was just so many angles I could take it to see, I can see the Phillies winning or I can see the Braves winning. The only way I can see the Diamondbacks winning is if they just get to our starting pitching. And while I think if they get to Kershaw, I don't think they're getting Bobby Miller. I really don't. And I think not only as a Dodger fan do I want to see it, but I feel like a lot of people in baseball are just starting to realize it now, and they're gonna learn fast that Miller is probably the real deal. Mm-hmm. And I feel like out of all the starters, he's built for October. So I'll go Dodgers in 4. I think they definitely probably take both games in LA, and I would bet, depending on how they go with that game 3, if they go Lance Lynn, I'm going push. I don't know. Maybe they win that game. Maybe they lose that game. And then they would probably be looking at a bullpen game or a variety of a bullpen game in game 4. Right. If there's anyone that's going to win a bullpen game, it's probably the Dodgers because I've seen them do it way too often in the playoffs. I mean, they won the fucking World Series in a bullpen game. They won the NLCS
Right.
that 2020 year with a bullpen game, and if it worked that year, I guess they have a kind of similar plan, but it's not going to be straight bullpen because they're kind of taking an approach that I've talked to with you before, like kind of how I when I'm playing on this show, I'm a GM in the show.
Gamers, man.
You take starters and just put them in the bullpen, and then
Okay.
they go 3, 4, or 5 innings. The way their game plan has pretty much been, all right, Lance Lynn goes one time through the order, Ryan Pepio comes in, he goes 6 innings, and then the game's over. So you get one guy for 3 innings, and you get the other guy for 6 innings, and then you negate for the rest of the bullpen because you're basically using 2 starters to play matchups or whatever. So I think it'll definitely work in the NLDS. It'll be interesting in the NLCS whether they play the Phillies or the Braves. I would have a lot more confidence telling you right now. I would have a lot more confidence playing the Braves than the Phillies because I feel like the Braves. I saw Walker Buehler himself tweeted this out, or he was on a podcast. He said that this Braves Phillies series is the 2023 version of the 2021 NLDS between the Dodgers and Giants, where those two teams played their hearts out and killed each other to the point where when one of those teams got to the NLCS, they were fucking gassed.
We're done. Right.
They were done. Max Scherzer ended up getting hurt. Buehler had to throw. Buehler, that playoff run, had to go on short rest 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And he was gassed by the next season. So I'm definitely thinking that's kind of what's going to happen with those two teams. But the Phillies, like I said, on paper, dude, like it's a scary scenario going to Philly for 3 straight games and then playing a team that has a full rotation where we're trying to piece it together one game at a time, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll go Dodgers in 4 in this series, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think what you said is perfect. I think this is probably one of the only series that I don't see multiple avenues for the losing team to win. I just don't see the Diamondbacks really competing to the point that we would like. Obviously, it's gonna be a good series. It's gonna be fun. Rivals in the division, stuff like that. But I think if LA wins both at home, I think they sweep them, man. I just don't see how the Diamondbacks could look at that team and how much better. I mean, you don't think that way, but how much better they really are down 2-0, even if they are coming home. I just don't see them winning a game. If they do end up winning one game in LA, I think it goes 5, but I still think LA wins. I just think it's a fact of how quick it is. If they can get the first 2, I think they're going to roll and just take it. If they split, you know how the Dodgers are. They're not always, they play down to their competition sometimes. They're usually the better team, but they're not always, going full force trying to, shit on everybody. But I don't see that happen. Honestly, if I had to pick right now, I think the Dodgers sweep them.
I like that. I hope that happens. And like speaking of X factors, dude, like before we end the show, I was looking at postseason stats for certain guys. I want you to take a guess at what JD Martinez's postseason OPS is.
Probably fucking raked because he was on that Red Sox team, right?
Yeah, it's over 900 for his career.
Nice.
And the Dodgers, they do play down to their competition for whatever reason it is. Whether it's Mookie playing down, because I've seen countless times where he doesn't really show up in the playoffs. Whether 21, he was kind of hurt. 22 last year, there's really no excuse. But 2020, he did show up, whether it was on defense or offense. He was a big part of that team, and he's going to need to. The Dodgers, they may squeak by this round, but in terms of outlook for the rest of the October, they are not winning the World Series or even getting to the World Series if Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts aren't leading the pack again, because that was their whole method. It balanced out the lineup so well that those two guys were playing MVP levels. They need to continue it. If not, I don't know how far this team could go. There could be a scenario where the D-backs, they said, a team can just get hot at the right time. But I'm very confident that you said Dodgers sweeping.
Yeah, man. I like that you brought that up though, man, because I think one of the biggest things, just real quick, but is having a lefty hitter and a righty hitter that rake, because you cannot stop that. Last year, which one of the biggest things that made the Phillies get to the or to the World Series was you had JT Realmuto and then you had Bryce Harper. You couldn't get either of them out. So you couldn't throw a lefty in there because JT Realmuto get on. You can't put a righty in there because Bryce Harper did a homer. If you can have Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman in that lineup, just getting on base like they do, slugging, I definitely don't see the Diamondbacks competing. And again, it's going to be tough for any of these lineups, but I'm excited, man. It's a lot closer than we've seen in past years. So, I mean, we'll be here for the next couple of weeks doing our pods. So I'm sure your guys are here about.
Yeah. So that about wraps it up for this division series preview. Depending on how things pan out, you may hear from us a lot sooner. Especially depending on how this Braves and Phillies series and Dodgers Diamondback series goes. Maybe we go live, depending on where the games are at.
If we win.
Yeah, if we were limited, if both of our teams lose, we'll probably not be going live.
You won't see us again.
Yeah. But yeah, so we'll definitely be back. We'll definitely be posting on our Twitter, our Instagram, Facebook, and our website at the Diamond Club Zero. And yeah, I'm excited for this this series, all these series, but I'm especially excited, not to be an NL homer, I'm excited for these two National League series, especially that Braves Philly series where I have some like things invested into it because I'm like, all right, well, if the Dodgers move on, who the fuck do I want to play?
Right.
All right. I just hope both those teams kill each other if my team. So, but that'll about do it. We'll definitely be back. We'll be posting, like I said, and getting ready for the NLCS where maybe both of our teams meet. So we never know.
Phillies, baby.
But yep, that'll be doing it for episode 11. We'll see you guys next time.
Oh.